各位，陈启宗有一场很多人忽视，但是极具启发性的演讲。他曾经在以色列的一次国际论坛上，用一种既理性又犀利的方式讲述了中国是什么。我们正在亲眼见证一个伟大文明的回归。40年以来，中国的经济崛起并非偶然，而是3000年历史趋势的回归。他提醒听众们，中国不是一个普通意义上的民族国家，而是一个伪装成民族国家的文明。这一句话后来在国际学界被广泛应用。在演讲中，陈启宗列举了历史的事实。当欧洲人还在洞穴生活的时候，中国已经拥有了3000年的文化沉淀。在罗马时代，波斯、埃及相继衰落之后，只有中国的文明依旧存在着。中国的语言、文化、疆域几乎保持延续，这是人类历史上的奇迹。他提出一个震撼的观点：西方的文明和新是对抗，上帝与魔鬼，天堂与地狱，善和恶，而中国的文明和新是和谐，如何与他人共处，互相包容。这一种思想使得中国在几千年里成为世界上最少使用武力，却最善于使用软实力的文明之一。陈启宗还讲了许多感人的细节，比如他提到1500年前，中国中部的开封就有犹太人定居，500年前，福建还有3万阿拉伯人在生活。当犹太人被纳粹迫害、漂泊无依的时候，中国是少数接纳他们的国家之一。他强调，中国对待他族的基本原则就是，只要你不惹麻烦，就能共存。这不是政治口号，而是文明的逻辑。而在现代政治层面，他指出，中国是世界上政治最可预测、经济最稳定的国家之一。你可以不喜欢它的制度，但必须承认它的连续性和理性。他打趣说，美国3年前没有人预测特朗普会当选，但中国的决策逻辑依旧始终如一，以国家利益为核心，以长期稳定为目标。理解中国不是看它的政策，而是理解它背后的文明。这一句话放在今天依然非常深刻，因为在一个充满对立、焦虑和误解的世界里，也许只有重新理解文明的差异，我们才能真正理解和平共处的意义。让我们看一下视频。
I was asked to talk about China and the New World Order that may change as a result of the rise of China. We all know that every couple hundred years, there's a rising of a great nation. In the 17th century, you have the Britain after defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588. And for 300 years or so, Britain became a very important country in the world. 120 years ago, roughly, America rose to replace Britain on a per capita GDP basis higher than that of the Britain. And in the ensuing 100-some years, America became by far the most important country in the world. It is not every day that you and I see the rise of a great nation. And surely in the last 40 years, we have seen one. But it is not right to say that it is a rise of a nation, because that nation has risen long time ago. Just like to say that Israel is a new nation is absolutely wrong, because you have been around for a long time. So China's rise, whether we like it or not, is going to change a lot of things. Let me first state my position that not for a single moment do I believe that China will be able to replace the United States, nor does China have the intention. The United States, as far as I'm concerned, will become the single most powerful, important country in the world that will in any shape or form threaten the leadership of the United States, nor does China want to be. So with that background, let me just tell you a little bit about China, what it is. If you don't understand what China is, you will not be able to figure out what it wants and what role does it want to play in the international scene. Then my second point, and I only have two, The second point is a few comments on China's relationship with the rest of the world, in particular with the United States and with this part of the world. And then I will conclude. First of all, let me address the issue of what is China. Think about this. Henry Kissinger used to say, when we, the Europeans, as if he's still in Europe, when the Europeans were still living on caves, China was already at the height of civilization. For the last 3,000 years, if not longer, China was at the height of human civilization and economic development. All the comparable civilizations of that era are basically gone or are at least no longer significant in the world. Where is the Persian culture? Perhaps a menace, but nothing more than that. Egypt, 80 million people, still a wonderful country, but no longer that influential in the global scene. You may say Israel, sorry, I come from a big country. Israel's only have 9 million people. You certainly punch above your weight class, but nonetheless, in terms of a civilization, in terms of a major global player, I think China is perhaps the only one who was there 3,000 years ago and who is still there today. Just like your language 3,000 years ago and today are basically similar to my knowledge, and I did study Hebrew a little. Chinese, same thing. You can read ancient texts of 4,000 years. The geographic territory of China 3,000 years ago is roughly the same as it is today. Of course, we know what happened since. In the last 200 years, China has waned significantly, so much so that nobody cares for China. Who cares? But today, after 200 years of terrible history, and surely as Israeli people, as Jews, you understand what terrible recent history means, and we, the Chinese, also know that. Is China's rise today a return to the trend line of 3,000 of years of history, or is it just a blip? I suspect that China's rise of the last 40 years is perhaps a return to the trend line of 3,000 years. So let me say something about what China is, which may be new to many of you. A professor at MIT, a sinologist, defined China the best way I can ever imagine. And no Chinese, in my opinion, can ever say such a thing. Only someone like Professor Lucian Pai, P-Y-E, he's a Caucasian gentleman. He's a friend of mine also. Unfortunately, he died about 10 years ago. Professor Lucian Pai says, China is a civilization which pretends to be a nation state. China is not a nation state a la 1648 Westphalia Agreement type of understanding of what a nation state is. Rather, China is a civilization which pretends to be a nation state. And what is the root of that civilization? It's Confucianism and it's Taoism. Both philosophies are very, very pacifist rather than aggressive. So one day I found myself maybe 10, 12 years ago in a room with Joe Nye. Many of you know Joe from the Kennedy School, together with Larry Summers and some China experts from Harvard, and Mrs. Tong Chi-hua, the first chief executive of Hong Kong, and the foreign minister at that time of China, Yang Jiechi. And I asked Joe, I said, Joe, you coined the word soft power. Tell me, in the last 3,000 years, which country or which civilization have used the soft power the most and the most successful? He cannot answer my question. Maybe he's not objective, I don't know. That answer is easy if you were to ask in the last 100 years, which country used soft power the most successfully and the most? Of course, it's America. If you were to say last 300 years, surely there's Britain. If you were to say 2,000 years, I would say two. In the West, Rome, Roman Empire, and in the East, China. But if you were to say 3,000 years, sorry, Rome did not start until, 64 BCE. So China is perhaps the country that have used soft power the most in the last 3,000 years and the most successfully. China does not need to use military, as your defense minister mentioned. War is always a last resort. Read Chinese history. China almost never need to use forces. You will not have a job there, Amos, as a general. You have a job, but not much to do. Because China uses soft power as a civilization to incorporate many of its different elements. Do you know that 1,500 years ago, there were so many Jews in China that today, in a particular county in the center of China, in the Henan province, all the tombs still have the Star of David. One day, my father-in-law, unfortunately he died a long time ago, he was on a plane in China and he saw this sitting next to this guy. He asked him, "Are you from Henan province?" He said, "Yes." "Are you from Kaifeng County?" He said, "Yes." "How do you know?" He said, "Look at your nose." He's probably of Jewish blood. Do you know that 500 some years ago, in southeast China, in the province of Fujian, right across from Taiwan, in the southern part, there were 300,000 Arabs living there. So if you're from that part of the world, as some of my friends are, and your last name is Ma or Ding or Bai, most likely you have an Arab blood. What did the Chinese do to the Jews of 1,000 years ago? What did the Chinese do to the Arab of 500 years ago? Nothing. As your defense minister said, live and let live. As long as you don't cause trouble, you can stay there. Who took care of the Jews after Nazi? They have no way to survive. They were sent to, as you all know, the camps in Cyprus. Some escaped here. The rest went through Suez Canal, all the way through the Indian Ocean, into Malacca Strait, into Pacific Ocean, not received by anyone because they were all so much run by the British. The first country that they can land was China. And China never mistreated the Jewish people in its long history. So, what is China? China is a civilization which pretends to be a nation state. What are the basic elements of this Chinese civilization? Number one, it's very different from yours. You affected the whole Western world. Judeo-Christianity is at the root of much of, if not all of, Western civilization as we know it today. China, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. We emphasize harmony. You are monotheistic religions, the origin of it. So there is God and the devil. There is heaven and hell, and there is salvation and perdition. To the Chinese, nothing is black and white. Harmony means you have to live with one another, you have to accept one another, and you have to somehow bear with one another. So the Chinese emphasize harmony. And yet, unlike you all, we also emphasize hierarchy. And you say, how can hierarchy and harmony be in unison? They can be in the Chinese scheme of things. I have a lot to say, but because of time, Amos, I will not overspeak. So I will not go into too much detail. But there's another thing that the Chinese civilization is known for. You'll be very surprised to hear this because, sorry to say, you're not a China expert. Do you know that China's history is one of the most open and inclusive country in the world? Do you know that 1,500 years ago, there were universities, shall I call it, that teaches many foreign languages. They have a foreign language institute in Chang'an, which is today Xi'an, the then capital of China. 500 years ago, they have the same thing. And so the Chinese are extraordinarily open-minded and inclusive civilization. You don't understand that because you have not spent time understanding it. I'm sure that if you do, you will come to the same conclusion. So let me say a word about China today. China is today perhaps politically the most predictable country in the world. Is America predictable? Who would guess that Donald Trump will become the president? For better or for worse, he is the president. 3 years ago, who would predict Brexit? Most likely you and I didn't. But that is the case with us today. China, politically, as again, Dr. Henry Kissinger often say, is highly predictable. And the reason you think China is not predictable is because you didn't spend the time, as Henry did, to understand China. China always acts in its self-best interest, of course, like everybody else. And if you do that, you understand the fears and aspirations of the Chinese people, you will find China's decision of the last 40 years since opening up, started by, who, by the way, is as short a man as David Ben-Gurion, but as great a man. So China is extraordinarily predictable politically. How they will react to a particular action on the part of the United States or the Middle East can easily be analyzed and understood, and hence perhaps predicted with some certainty. China is also economically one of the most stable countries in the world today. It doesn't have the capital market that caused all the trouble in the Western world today. It doesn't open its capital account for good reasons. And China is growing at 6-7% per annum for a long, long time already, and will likely continue for the next couple of years. I heard your defense minister said that Iran spent $13 billion in putting up all these weaponry, not far from here. My company in the last 10 to 15 years have also invested $13 billion in commercial properties all over China. You would have been a lot better off if those $13 billion from Iran would have been invested in my company. I think they would make a lot more money that way. And by the way, tell you another thing. My company for the last 13 years have been basically debt-free. No net debt. How the hell do you spend $13 billion investing in hard asset that we never sell? We only keep to rent. And yet have zero debt. Figure that one out. IDC is known for its business school. Get your professor to study that, and I'll tell him why he is right or wrong.